everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Díaz, and today I bring you my November wrap-up. I was going to do two parts of this video because I have lots of books to tell you about, but I have so many videos to upload before the end of the year because otherwise they won't make sense that I decided, screw it, let's make a super long video. Go get a cup of tea or wine or coffee or whatever your drink of choice may be. Sit down, get comfortable, and let's begin. So November started a bit slow just in terms of the amount of time that I got to read. I was doing lots of stuff. It took a major bodily breakdown, let's call it. I just really was forced to stop. So much so that I had to take a PCR exam to know if I had it. Luckily, I didn't. It was just sheer exhaustion combined with a common flu. Looking at the bright side, I got to rest. And so I got to read a bit more. In the end, I read quite a lot, and also I read so many great books, so many new favorites. Before we start with November books, however, I forgot to tell you about a book I read in October. I hesitated whether to include it here or in my December wrap-up because it is sold mostly as a non-fiction book, although it does contain some fiction. It's Devotion by Patti Smith. It is my first Patti Smith and I adored it. I haven't bought yet any of her other books, but I am definitely going to get Just Kids. This is part of the Why I Write Yale series, I think. It's a conference that she offered, and the thing is that it starts with her reflections on writing and it ends with reflections on writing, and in between it has a really good short story about a young girl who falls into a relationship with an older man and she sees him as her only way out of her situation. It's dark and eerie, everything I love in a short story. I just really enjoyed it, and I also really enjoyed Patti Smith's thoughts on writing. There is one in particular where she says that we write because we just cannot simply live, and I was like, yes, that's exactly it, and it applies to all art. It also has some great pictures and it has some poetry, so it is a really short book filled with a lot of different things. It is one of those things that you either love it or hate it, in the sense that if you like the content and the style, then you will like the book. If not, then it doesn't make any sense. For me, it really worked. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I would recommend it if that sounds interesting to you. And of course, if you like Patti Smith. Now, let's move on to the books. And I've arranged them from least enjoyed, actually I'll start with a DNF, to most enjoyed. The ones in between, you know, it kind of fluctuates. On a different day, I might say something different, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a way of organizing these. Let's begin with the DNF. I DNF The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Blum. I am so angry because I was so looking forward to this book and I didn't like it at all, so I'm not keeping it. However, I got this book at a wonderful bookstore in Pike Place in Seattle. It's called BLMF, and it's such a wonderful secondhand bookstore, but because I was doing that thing of trying to buy one book at every bookstore I visited, I only got this one, and it's my only memory of that. I mean, not my only memory, but you know what I mean. I'm so sad that I'm going to part with this because of that, but I don't keep books that I don't like. The subtitle for this is Murder and the Birth of Forensic Medicine in Jazz Age New York. That sounds amazing, and it's narrative nonfiction, but I didn't get what this was trying to do. Why would this story be told in such a way? And I thought maybe I started it as not the right time because I was starting to feel off, so I gave it another chance later on in the month and I still didn't like it. It is a very fragmented style. It's almost like giving you vignettes of these two people who invented the forensic science, but at the same time it's separated by poison type, but at the same time it's chronological, which I don't know. I think it's because at some point there was explosion of usage of the poison, but I didn't even get that. Very fragmented again in a narrative way that doesn't make any sense, and that I personally don't want from a book that I expect so much information from, but I also just couldn't get in the narrative. I didn't know the people they were talking about, as in Of course, I hadn't heard about them beforehand, but also I wasn't getting to know them through here because it was so episodic. However, it is a very popular book, so don't just take my word for it. I'm also very deep into nonfiction, so maybe for people who are trying to get into it might work. I just feel like I was learning nothing, that I was missing context, and I didn't even like the writing style to save it. At least if I wasn't going to learn as much as I expected, maybe you could tell me a nice story, but I didn't even get that. So I DNF'd it. Then I have this graphic novel, Sartre, by Mathilde, Ramadier, and Anaïs Dopammier. This is translated from the French. This is an edition in Spanish, but it is available in English, so I'm going to, of course, drop the name down below with all the books that I'm mentioning, so you can check it out in English if you so wish. This is translated into Spanish by Aníbal Díaz Gallinal. I am so sad, but I am keeping this book because it is a graphic novel that it is sort of a biography of Sartre, but it focuses on the development of his philosophy and his relationship with Simone de Beauvoir. However, it's trying to do so much and the storytelling sucks, which is sad because the vignettes and the art style is beautiful and I adore it, and that's why I'm keeping it. It starts with Sartre as a boy, which I'm down with, but he grows up so fast. It kind of doesn't make any sense because then we're supposed to be also engaging with Simone de Beauvoir as a main character. Actually, this has 3 narrative voices. It has like a general narrative voice, and it has Sartre's inner voice and Simone's voice somewhat, a little bit. Since it focuses so much on their relationship, then the fact that you only see a little bit of Sartre's childhood and only his childhood makes 0 sense. And then it tries to go into his philosophy, but it doesn't do enough about that. It tries to go into his relationship with Albert Camus, and it doesn't really delve into that, his relationship with politics and with fame. I think that was the most accomplished section, where he talks about rejecting the novel and not wanting to become a celebrity and becoming a celebrity anyways. I think that part was a bit interesting. In comparison to this, which is already a short novel that tried to do so fucking much and failed, the Magritte graphic biography I reviewed for my October wrap-up, I'm going to link that video down below, is so much more accomplished. It's so much shorter. The story is fantastic and it doesn't make that much sense, but it goes into one aspect of Magritte, and it does so through Magritte's style, which at some point here it tries to talk about Sartre philosophizing through his own writing, but it doesn't work. And compared to that, this was a complete letdown, and even if I hadn't read that before, it would still be a letdown. So and the last book I was disappointed by is Avoid the Day, a new nonfiction in 2 movements by Jay Kirk. This was for the challenge of movement. Oh, by the way, I did complete every single challenge except that I changed some of the books for each challenge. You'll see, but I did it. If you still want to check out my TBR and MBR, I will link it down below and in the eye, because I did talk about many cool books there and you might get inspired to pick some up. Okay, so this is divided into 2 parts, which I knew because it's in 2 movements, but I hadn't realized that the 2 parts weren't connected at all. I'm not that mad about it. And I'm also not very mad about the narrator. This is part biography. When I bought it, I thought it was going to be about the narrator going to research Bela Bartok's lost manuscripts in Transylvania and using that as a way to not cope with his dying father, with whom he has a bad relationship. And so I knew it was going to be somewhat biographic, but I thought the main focus was going to be Bartok. And for the first half, that was the case. I absolutely adored and learned so much. And I also thought the writing was so atmospheric and so nice. Now, Jay Kirk is a very unlikable person. Well, I don't know if person, but the character he constructs for himself in this narrative is very, very unlikable. I didn't mind that. I thought he was kind of an asshole at times, but you know, I'm okay with it, especially nonfiction, because I'm here for the information and I was there. As the Bartok section progresses, however, he gets less and less invested in the research and becomes more invested in drugs and alcohol and he passes out. He's basically a blackout drug addict and drunk, which, I mean, it's not fine, but okay, I get it. I don't mind those gaps in the narrative, but then the project of researching Bartók is forgotten. Therefore, all my interest in this book kind of vanishes. And then in the second half, he goes on a trip to the Arctic, I think, and they are filming a horror film. And that part is a freaking mess. Here's the thing. Filming a film might be super interesting, but describing the tedious process of filming scene after scene and what happens there is just so uninteresting. And there wasn't really any thread. I mean, it's just this guy existing, and you know he's out of it most of the time, so it's not like he's having some profound revelation or that he's describing nature. For me, the second part is something I will never revisit, but I'm still keeping this book because I would like to revisit the first section of the Bartók section because it was actually fascinating, and I think the narrative there was good. If it hadn't been so good at the beginning, it would also be going. Okay, now let's move on to all the books that I did enjoy this year. First, I have Can You Ever Forgive Me by Lee Israel, Memoirs of a Literary Forger, and yes, this is the movie tie-in cover because I did really enjoy the movie with Melissa McCarthy. It's not a masterpiece, but I really liked it. This is about Lee Israel, who was a writer. She had some hit biographies, but then she had a really bad Estée Lauder one, and she took to first forging letters from literary celebrities because that apparently was a really active market in New York in the, I want to say, 80s or so. And then when that closed up, she started to replace original copies with her forgeries and have this guy, a friend of hers, sell them. This was really short and light. It's not a masterpiece, but my version of a brain candy. I liked her tone. I think it's very tone dependent. If you like that New York Sass, Dorothy Parker-esque style with lots of reference, very quick and a little bit dislikable, then you'll like this. If not, then really pass it up because it's really hit or miss, I think. I found this to be cocktail hour with Lee Israel, and I enjoyed that. Plus, you know, I'm a sucker for literary gossip, and so this was really interesting. I also like that it features her letters, and I do think she has a good sense of storytelling. However, again, I've accepted this book for what it is, but as a criticism, objectively speaking, this is very rushed and haphazard. It's like literally her telling you something. It's not a well-framed narrative. You won't learn so much. You know what I mean? For example, if you see the film, you see the market and how she starts selling them. And in here, she just said like, okay, I started selling them and that's it. And then they got suspicious. So in the movie, that is much more explained. They are two very different experiences, but I personally enjoyed it and would recommend it if you really like that very particular thing, which is not for everybody, and that's fine. Then, this is a Spanish edition of MIchel Onfray's Theory of the Journey. I think that's the name in English. This is translated from the French. And my translation is by Juan Ramón Azaola. This is a book-length essay all about journeys, what it means to travel and why we travel, and the difference between a traveler and a tourist. That sort of reflection. It's been such a long time since I read non-narrative, poetic, philosophical essays. I think because I was fresh out of college and I knew I was going to enter grad school, and so I needed a bit of a buffer there. Also because the last book I read like that on my own was A Philosophy of Walking by Frédéric Grossman, I think, or something like that. I'm going to link the name down below. But that book, although interesting at points, was really disappointing, and so I kind of stepped away from that whole genre of philosophy. But apparently I'm back. I found this on a bookstore looking for a different book that bookstore was out of, by the way, but I have since found, so it's all good. I really enjoyed it. I don't think this is life-changing. A lot of ideas I agree with. Some of them I don't. In particular, there is one that promotes traveling in pairs, but in pairs with a friend, because he says like romantic traveling is completely different and the best interaction is with a friend. And also the assumption is that the friend is of your same sex and the relationship always is man and woman. And this book is not that old, I think. It was originally published in 2007, which I guess, progress is so slow. Anyways, that was something I took issue with. Also the idea that traveling on your own is not as good because it's one of my favorite activities. But anyways, other sections I thought, yeah, I agree with that. And with other sections, I did think, oh, I've never thought about it like that. That is interesting. I did interact with it a lot. I put tabs, I highlighted, I wrote my comments. That is what I want. If you like poetic examinations in the vein of Bachelard's The Poetics of Space, this is kind of the same thing but with journeys, and actually they do cite Bachelard here. So I enjoyed it. I think I am going to continue on reading these kind of stuff because I do enjoy thinking about stuff poetically. Then I want to tell you about This Will Make You Smarter, New Scientific Concepts to Improve Your Thinking, edited by John Brockman. This is a collection of answers to the Edge question of, I think, 2012, yes, which was, what concept do you think would improve everyone's cognitive toolkit? And then a bunch of people from all over the world and very different backgrounds answered. And a lot of people don't like them because they are so superficial and introductory, but I love them because I love things that are bite-sized and serve as departure points to then explore into deeper things. I find that very much suits the way I like to learn and consume information, and so I would really recommend this. I would also recommend This Explains Everything, which is, I think, one to a later question, which was, what is your favorite theory that explains the world? And I love that. I think the editorial process is mostly good. I like the flow of the concepts proposed. I think they make a lot of sense together. However, there are a couple of instances where there was some repetition, and I get that maybe the two people that were proposing them were both very important and they didn't want to leave either of them out, and they couldn't decide who to leave out. So, but you know, as a reader, that is a shame. Other than that, I did learn a lot of cool concepts from here that I will later check out. Then I got to another graphic nonfiction book, The Dialogues by Clifford V. Johnson, Conversations about the Nature of the Universe. And this book is exactly that. It is a passion project by Clifford V. Johnson, who is a scientist, but he's also a comic artist, and it's kind of his hobby, but also like hidden passion. In the preface, he talks about how interdisciplinary stuff are often referenced. Like nowadays, you have to sell interdisciplinary stuff at university, but it's something that is preached but rarely practiced or rarely endorsed to be practiced by people. And so scientists often have to fight to get into humanist spaces and vice versa. As someone who studied literature and linguistics but has been for a long time really interested in neuroscience and neurolinguistics, boy do I know that. I feel that pain. So already from the preface, Johnson had me. And then each of the sections here is a different dialogue. Some of the characters, however, are recurrent, but it takes up the form of the Platonic dialogues and the Socratic method, and it's really, really great. It's really graphic. And that sounds like a pun, but I promise it's not. It's just that, for example, when it's talking about gravitational pulls, it will illustrate that to the best of the abilities. So if you like science writing, you will know there is a long tradition of dialogues in science writing, and this takes it to the next level. I will say, however, I would have loved to have read this probably before I even found out this existed, when I was just beginning to read pop science, because there were a lot of concepts that I was already quite familiar with, and so it was a bit of a slog because it covers many topics, from black holes to what the scientific method is, to what infinity might be. It's hard to say what level of knowledge you need to have to truly enjoy this. I would say if you have a keen interest in beginning to see what are the main areas of research, especially in physics and math, I think this is a great place to start. If you are already deeper into that, it might be half and half, or you might have to be like me, that you get so happy just seeing intro level stuff. You don't care if you already know some of the stuff, which is totally me. I just love thinking of new ways to communicate knowledge to a broader audience, and I think this does such a great job. I think the paneling is very smart, the dialogues are smart, I love the cast of characters. My only critique, that didn't bother me, is that the line work and, you know, the style in general feels a bit amateurish. Especially the line work, which is something I pay a lot of attention to, felt a bit hesitant, and I feel it would have benefited from maybe working alongside a more professional artist. However, I do like the sense of experimentation. I do like that Johnson gave himself space to try out new things. I think it gets stronger as it goes on. Some pages are achieved beautifully, like that one. I would check out more by Johnson. I think this is a great gift for someone who's just getting into science writing. It's a treasure and I will revisit it many times. I will recommend it to a lot of people. Give it a shot if you're looking for something like this, because it's totally worth it, and it's worth that graphic novel price tag. This is the one I read for the Discovery Challenge. Then this is the one that I ended up reading for the Time Challenge, because it has a time. It is the Best American Food Writing 2019, edited by Sami Nosrat. This was my first Best American Food Writing one. I'm definitely going to pick up the 2021 because I adored this selection. It is not focused on restaurant criticism. This covers such a huge range of topics. It's very hard to talk about, but most of it is so great. I will read you the title of my favorites. Flavors of Space-Time, which is just like a 2-page reflection on what it means to taste. Then The Food of My Youth, which talks about state-provided meals. Why do poor Americans eat so unhealthfully? Because junk food is the only indulgence they can afford, which is exactly what it says. It explains it in 3 pages, and it's heartbreaking but also illuminating. The Maraschino Mogul, which reads almost like a true crime story, really. Sliced and Diced. Here, how Cornell scientist Brian Wansink turned shoddy data into viral studies about how we eat, which is fascinating. I've been obsessed with metadata research since I read an article about it in a different science and nature writing anthology. Then the other one that I really love is Big in Japan, which talks about Kit Kats. Anthony Bourdain and the Power of Telling the Truth, a great profile. The Gay Man Who Brought Tapas to America, which taught me something I had no idea about. And Sugar Time by Ruby Tando, which is such a fascinating look at the place sugar occupies in popular culture, from an object of desire, from poison, from its horrible history with slavery. It's just so good. So those are some of the highlights. I really recommend you pick this up if you want to check out food writing that is not just restaurant criticism. I do enjoy food criticism, but this goes so much further than that. My only critique is that there is one particular essay that is almost 50 pages long. It's because it's kind of the result of parallel research for a book, and although the story was interesting and the final reflection was also very illuminating, I don't think any essay should be 50 pages long. Okay, then I have zero idea what this is called in English, but I think it is available in English. I will put it down below if that is the case. I read Cuaderno de Faros by Jasmina probably Barrera, which translates to notebook of lighthouses, or like lighthouse notebook. Again, everything I mentioned is always listed down below, and I will make sure to include the English translation and translator if it's available. This is a very short book reflecting, oh look at it, it's so beautiful. This was originally published in Spanish, but Jasmina Barrera does write in English and Spanish because she actually, I think, works at a program of Spanish writing at NYU. She's Mexican and kind of lives between Mexico and the US, and a lot of the book does take place in the US. So that's kind of the situation there. She's basically obsessed with lighthouses, and in this book she is telling us about her trips to lighthouses, also how authors such as Virginia Woolf or Janet Winterson and Jules Verne have written about lighthouses. Oh, and Stevenson, that was also very important, I think, Robert Louis Stevenson. She's also reflecting on why she's so obsessed with lighthouses. Why does she feel the need to collect and to do these pilgrimages? It's so my jam. She weaves this literary analysis with her own experiences, with broader reflections, just so well. She writes beautifully, but not extremely ornately. I thought it was just the sweet spot, and I really love this, and I would recommend it if it sounds like something you want to check out. Then one that I am so sad, I'm afraid is not translated. This is Loco Afán, Crónicas de Sidario by Pedro Lemebel. I've talked a lot about Pedro Lemebel this year. It's a new favorite author that I discovered this year. He's a Chilean author. He wrote My Tender Bachelor, which is a book that I recommend all the time, and that is translated into English, so go read it. It is also up for voting for the Reading Latinas book club, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, do check out that announcement video. Link down below. Anyways, this is nonfiction. It is chronicles about homosexuality in Chile, in particular homosexuality as it relates to culture and AIDS, and how it's so much different than in the United States. And because Pedro Lemebel was such an iconic performer and author, he became very famous with this book. He was invited to New York to give talks and to walk in pride parades and all that stuff. And so there are quite a lot of reflections that talk about that difference and how a lot of our archetypes of culture, I think you can make that argument for so many different aspects of culture, but in particular gay culture, are not even inherited but just received from the US, and that was great. It also takes you to the depths of Chile, and it's just so great. It also reminded me that you can have nonfiction that is neither narrative nor informative, it's just reflections. Some of his chronicles resemble almost prose poetry, but with him it's never meandering. It's always with a point. I think when you strip away the poetry, though you shouldn't because it's beautiful, you are still left with very smart reflections. I really love him. I want to read everything he's ever written. However, I do want to space out his books because I want to really enjoy them. I'm thinking one a month. So you'll be hearing a lot more Pedro Lemebel stuff next year. I hope you enjoy that. I hope I discovered that a lot more of him is translated than what I think, or that a lot more by him gets translated soon. And also, I know there are people here that also speak Spanish and can read in Spanish, so I wouldn't want to not include a book just because it's not translated into English. Another book I adore, this was actually the first book I adored in November, Scenes from a Revolution by Mark Harris, The Birth of the New Hollywood. I already talked about this book in the nonfiction that reads like fiction, linked down below and in the eye, and this basically talks about the 5 nominated films for the 1976 Academy Awards. They were very different. They were Bonnie and Clyde, In the Heat of the Night, Dr. Dolittle, The Graduate, and I'm forgetting one. I always forget one. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? That's the other one. It talks about how each of these films came to be and what it meant that they were being made, how the reception was, what happened at those Academy Awards. It looks at storytelling in film, it looks at censorship in film and how the production code was fading away, talks about racism in film and how there was a new Hollywood starting, and that those Academy Awards in particular were kind of the tipping point. I think the writing is so compelling. It is narrative nonfiction done so right. As I said in that other video, it reads like all these films are characters and they have their own story arcs, and then they meet all at the Academy Awards and what happens after that. If you love film, this is a must. You cannot not read this book. I do think, however, that this might be the UK title and that the US title is Pictures from a Revolution. There is a mix-up there. I don't know which is which, but know that you can find it under any of these titles. Another essential read, if you like a different genre of writing, is Listen to This by Alex Ross. Before you say anything, and it says it here, author of The Rest is Noise. I know The Rest is Noise is his magnum opus. opus and that I need to read that one. And I did buy that first, but through the magic and wonders of my local postal service, that hasn't arrived to me yet. This is what I got and I read it and I loved it. This is a collection of essays. It's a selection, so it's not about just one thing. So I do think this is not a place to start with music writing if you are already into music writing, whatever type. If you read pop music, rock music, composition, classical music, whatever it is, you need to read this. Because first of all, it's so eclectic. It focuses on so many types of music. The first one is about how Alex Ross grew up only listening to classical music and then got into punk and very experimental rock music, and then how that broadened his horizons in ways he didn't expect. Much like the author of Let's Talk About Love, A Journey to the End of Taste, Carl Wilson, which is also an amazing book that you must read if you like music writing. So in here, he talks about Björk, he talks about Radiohead, he also talks about John Luther Adams, who is now one of my favorite composers. He talks about classical and pop music in China, so many different things, and he's a wonderful writing. It's one of my favorites of all time. You need to read it. I want to reread it right now. It's all marked up. Yeah, I love it. And finally, one of the most impactful, heartbreaking, but also really inspiring and hopeful books I've ever read. One that I think everyone should pick up, no matter if it's not your style. I don't care. You need to read this. Our Women in the Ground. Essays by Arab women reporting from the Arab world, edited by Sarah Hankier, with a foreword by Christian Amanpour. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's an anthology of different writing by a myriad of different female journalists from the Arab world. They come from different contexts, from different countries. Some of these are written in English, some of these are translated from the Arabic. Some of them start from very particular things. For example, women, I believe, in Syria not being able to work at all, therefore having to go buy intimate things such as underwear and makeup from male salespeople, which sucked, to broader themes like war and conflict and, immigration, all these very different things. I have never read an anthology that is so cohesive in a way, but at the same time, it's so multiple and varied in its viewpoints. And also the quality of each of these essays is so good. There was not one of these essays that was bad, and it will teach you lots. Now I want to go and learn more, but it's a really good starting point to talk about these abstract concepts in a very concrete way and to see the daily reflections. But it's also not only about conflict and not only about life in those countries, but also the experience of being an Arab woman working as a journalist all around the world, what that means in terms of family expectations, in terms of how people see you and you see yourself. And it also talks a lot about journalism, what it means to be a good journalist, where you draw the line with being, subjective or objective and that kind of thing. There's a lot of that going on in here because a lot of them reported on politics. Please do check it out. It's amazing. That is it. I'm so glad. I think I'm going to start organizing my wrap-ups by which ones I like least to the ones I like more all the time, because I am left with a really cool fuzzy feeling now, so I'm very happy about that. Yeah, I hope you like this video. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up, please subscribe and comment what did you read for Nonfiction November. Have you read any of these books? Do you plan to read any of these books? Any and all comments are welcome down below. Also follow me on my other social media and see you next time.